One of the reasons why arts and religion, I think, connect with each other is at the root, in some sense, they both have to do with meaning in some way. Religion, obviously, you can tell it's like humanity seeking a meaning, a reason for life, a purpose, an understanding of like what's even going on and where do I fit in the world. But art kind of does the same thing, in a sense. Through the form of self expression, through the form of activity, there's a sense in which artists understand themselves or something inside themselves, and by creating art, they reify, they make real something that was previously just in their heads, or maybe a feeling in their guts, or an experience or sensation that was beyond words. By making art, in a sense, artists are word making. They're creating a tangible word, which in a sense is like a signpost that can show themselves and perhaps even other people a way towards some kind of ineffable experience of life. As an artist, you're a meaning maker. And I think as a religious person, too, you are a meaning seeker. I've got kind of a different stance on meaning than I've heard other people mention. So I thought this would be an interesting video to just explore perhaps a different way of considering meaning. And because this is primarily a writer's YouTube channel, I'm excited to say that it has everything to do with words. Normally when we think of meaning, we don't think of words, right? We think of reality, the real thing. What's the meaning and purpose to my life? But I think it's a very interesting thing that we're searching for meaning and words have meanings. I've never heard anybody point that out before. But to me, it seems like a suspiciously important detail that we happen to use the exact same word, searching for meaning, and words having meanings. For centuries, those two things have shared the exact same word. And for me, I think whenever I see words revealing something like that, I think there's perhaps a secret insight that we've overlooked that nonetheless we carry on from generation to generation because subconsciously we recognize that it is either true or useful. So this is a little game that I like to play where I look and identify where is a certain word used in seemingly very different circumstances and what might that mean? Delving into that word and its sense, what might that reveal to me about what it means to be a human and what meaning really is? I don't know if you're a word nerd like me. Maybe you've got a word nerd in your life. There are certain types of people out there who are just really into etymology or really into expressing the very specific meaning of what they're trying to say to someone. It shows up in all kinds of stripes, but there are certain groups of people who seem to be really fascinated and engaged with the specifics of a word's sense. And my argument is that that impulse that moves some people to be word nerds is the exact same impulse that gives people a religious sentiment. It's a pursuit of meaning. Really, there's not too much of a difference between the person who is poring over an etymological dictionary and looking at the specifics of how a word's changed over time, the subtleties that a word can express. And on the other side, somebody who's doing a Bible study. I don't know if you're a practicing Christian or not, but Bible study is one of the few practices remaining in Western civilization, I think, where people approach a word. They approach words or the Word of God, and they pour into it very carefully in order to extract some kind of sense and meaning from it. It's a special thing. People taking the time to meditate and ruminate on a specific word or message, and extracting something out from it. The only corollary I can think of at the moment outside of like Bible study might be in high school when you like studied poetry or something. It's this like finely grained, specific, and sometimes respectful, sometimes incisive connection with the text to try to pull some kind of meat out of it that isn't obviously there on the surface from a surface interaction. It's something that requires digestion, breaking down. And the outcome of this kind of thing, like a Bible study or a word study if you're an etymological nerd, I would argue the outcome of what happens after you've digested is meaning. We often use other words for it, like wisdom. You've extracted some kind of wisdom out of it. Now, critics would say that people who do Bible studies, the stuff they pull out of the text is oftentimes arbitrary. If you look at it with a critical eye, there might not be anything that would suggest to a more skeptical type the insight that has proceeded from the Bible study. It's like, well, they just made that up out of their own head. Sam Harris has the perfect example of somebody reading the recipe for like how to cook fish or something, and he's broken down from the fish recipe like, well, it says that you use 3 pieces of tilapia because the 3 represent the Trinity, and also the 3 stages of life energy that exist in the human body. You know, that kind of like a skeptic would say, dude, it's a recipe for fish, okay? You're looking for something that isn't actually there. And that is the skeptical view towards these kinds of activities. There's all kinds of ways you can study a word or study the Bible. But the more esoteric you get, the more skeptical people will say, I don't know that you're discerning what's actually there anymore. It kind of seems like you're just in fantasy land, and your connection to truth is completely severed at this point because you're just fantasizing and imagining things that the author didn't specifically intend when he or she first presented this text. It's a valid argument. The spiritual world is rife with people who lack discernment, who are truly just making up nonsense as they go. But I would argue that one of the reasons for that is because once you dig deeply into a word, once you dig deeply into meaning, there's a certain point at which rationality can no longer serve you. You have to get beyond rationality because you're starting to get into a tangle where things are so associated and connected that it requires a more subtle and intuitive engagement in order to pull something that might actually be true, might actually be real in there in the connection. Maybe a way to express it might be in the idea of family, right? Like, say, my brother and I. People might look at us and say, like, well, the connection is logical and obviously there that those two are brothers. Perhaps we look just like each other. So that would be an example of like kind of an easy logical association of like those two are brothers. They hang out together a lot. They live in the same house. There are so many connection points between myself and my brother that it's a very simple black and white connection between associating us as family members. Then say, on the other hand, like I've got a third cousin in Wyoming. That's a much less tentative connection than me and my brother, right? Perhaps me and my cousin don't look at all alike. We live in totally different places. You know, we don't live in the same house. Perhaps we don't even know each other. The ground truth between me and my unknown cousin off in the distance is we are connected by a strand. We are family with each other. But that connection in some senses is so subtle, it's so clouded by other data that it's difficult to find that connection point. And I think that's what it's like when you delve into wisdom. Once you get beyond the clear sense of a word, beyond the clear sense of someone's mental intention when they're creating something, I think what spiritual people have recognized is there are more subtle associations that are sometimes difficult to express, but are nonetheless there. There's some family of meaning that is not rational. Perhaps it's not irrational, but it's non-rational. And it takes a particular kind of discernment in order to engage with that kind of wisdom. There's a certain clarity of mind that is required in order to pull those truths out. If people delve into religious literature without that kind of discernment or clarity of mind, then ultimately what they pull out of text is fantasies. They might pull out, what they want to hear from the text, or, what was on their mind, or something they dreamed about before. There are all kinds of emotional and thought influences that get in the way of someone engaging with a text with discernment. And therefore, what they pull out of that functionally is nonsense. But that doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of meaning that can be discerned beneath there. It's just that it might be difficult to argue, and it's certainly difficult to see. In my previous video, I did kind of a meditation on the idea of nourishment, and you could consider that a sort of word study. I sat in the concept of nourishment for a while and tried to pull out some sense from it that might be true or beneficial, something that at first glance I might not notice, but if I chewed on the text, if I chewed on the word a little bit, I might pull out some ideas about nourishment underneath the surface that could be beneficial to me, particularly in a time of year when I'm in want of nourishment. I'm more fatigued in the fall. It would be nice if I could find a way to nourish myself better. And so you could say I did a kind of Bible study on the word nourishment. Now, reverent people might have real problems with considering a word study equivalent to a Bible study. You might consider the Bible to be a particularly sacred text. In fact, many Christians view the Bible as the infallible Word of God. It's a kind of thing that you engage with not to interpret yourself, but to have it interpret your life for you. I agree with that in a sense, and it's not my point in this video to challenge that perspective on the Bible. But what I'd like to point out is the practice of engaging with a word itself unveils a very similar and perhaps identical sense of wisdom that you get from engaging with the Bible. And I think it's important to note, too, that the Bible is words. You're doing a word study, in a sense, when you read the Bible. Now, perhaps it's a particularly divinely arranged grouping of words, making a sense of meaning that can't be found anywhere else in the world. Perhaps that's true. Perhaps it isn't. But when you're reading the Bible, you are doing a word study. And so it's my suggestion that perhaps, just like in the Bible, if you look at individual words and engage with them, you might be able to cull out a similar sense of meaning. And my argument for why that's the case is words have meanings. In fact, I would argue that the whole point of words and language is meaning. Words are a technology of us being able to discern and reify meaning, to express meaning commonly among each other, and to understand meaning more deeply for ourselves. Words at their base root, I think, are technology. And I think meaning is the point. Meaning is the reason we made words as an assistance for us. Perhaps even religions are a type of word technology in that sense. Perhaps laws are a kind of word technology in the same exact way. Perhaps principles and ways of life, similarly, are a kind of structured way to engage with meaning when it's too wispy otherwise for us to navigate it. Augustine once said, "The God that can be conceived is not the true God." And I think what he was getting at with that is you can think about God all you want to. You can have ideas about God. You could take an expression of who God is by reading the Bible very carefully. But what Augustine believed was that the true God was beyond all the words. The true God was beyond all the ideas, all the systems, all the laws, all the concepts. God was behind all that. And perhaps even the Bible was a system generated in order to interact with that true God that could not be put into words, could never fit into a word. But the word was designed to be a way of showing something that was difficult to see otherwise. I mentioned etymology previously. If you're into etymology at all, you may know that linguists have spent a lot of time trying to discern the relationships between different languages. And it was actually a huge, shocking discovery 100 or so years ago that if you look at these different languages, some of them strangely have very similar words with very similar meanings. People have devoted oodles and oodles of time to trying to find rules that might explain the connections between those. And what they came up with was a shockingly convincing argument that there used to be a mother language, a proto-language, out of which lots of different languages developed into their own senses and meanings. In terms of all the different Western languages, that proto-language we call Proto-Indo-European. We don't have any written documents in Proto-Indo-European, but just like in terms of family resemblances, like we talked about earlier, of those tenuous ties, they've looked very carefully and believe quite convincingly that there was not only an ancient language that produced not only ancient Greek, but Indic and Russian, English, German. All these different languages proceeded from the same source. They're like cousins to each other. And we've got an entire dictionary of those root words that have produced most of the words that we use today. With this, I see an incredible opportunity to examine meaning from a different lens. Proto-Indo-European, the words in those languages, in some senses, are loaded with potential, in a sense that our modern languages are not. Those root words in Proto-Indo-European produced all of the words that we use today. And so by examining them and speculating on, the senses of meaning that are possible within those root words, I think there's an incredible opportunity for us to expand our own scope on meaning itself in shocking ways. As an example of what I mean by this, let's take a look at a Proto-Indo-European word. We'll look at the word quell. This was a root word in Proto-Indo-European. What did it mean back then? Well, in a sense, I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly what it meant back then. But we know the words that came out of it, and that gives us a sense of the sphere of meaning that it might carry. Quell might have meant wheel, but to explore some of the senses of what quell might have meant, let's look at some of the words that ultimately derived from this root word quell. We have cultivate, culture, colony, cult, We have the word circle or cycle, bicycle. We have words like collar, which means the thing that goes around your neck. So again, another round kind of thing. So a vast span of senses that come from quell. If I sit and ruminate on these different possible meanings, the idea that I get from quell is like, okay, well, you've got like kind of a circular shape that it's describing. And then you've got a lot of words about like colonizing and cultivating. So in a sense, quell might have meant something like your sphere of influence, basically. It's like the round circular terrain where you live, perhaps maybe where you do life, where you farm, where you build up a homestead, where basically you grow a life and a culture. Quell might be kind of your circle of life, your circle of influence. It's interesting to me as I think about quell, how much of it seems to have brought about words that are associated with growth and development. Quell seems to be a developmental kind of sense. You could imagine it being otherwise. Like when we think of our spheres of influence, perhaps sometimes we might think of it in a more competitive sense, right? Of like, I need to fight for my own. I need to work hard to get this job promotion because there are other people angling for it. So I want this circle of influence, but someone else does too, so we're fighting for it. Perhaps you even have a sense in your own life that you can only keep what you have if you're struggling and fighting and working for it all the time. I don't get that sense from the words that derived from quell, though. This perspective of quell was something more like something that thrived through care and attention. Something that grew not out of a sense of protectiveness, but rather as a sense of engaged development in making the thing more than it was previously, of refining it and allowing it to become more than what it currently was. Now, this exercise might seem totally arbitrary to you, like I said, and I could be totally wrong. This might not have ever been what they meant way back then, before writing, when they said quell to each other. But in a sense, to me, that doesn't matter. What matters to me is I'm taking the opportunity to put my stake in a particular word, a particular sphere of meaning, and to explore around it about the potential of the sense. I have a unique opportunity in this root word because we don't exactly have a word that means all of those things anymore. So as I explore, perhaps even imaginatively, a word that does convey that vast sphere of senses, there's something that I can learn about meaning itself, perhaps, by exploring that uncharted terrain. Again, that's why I think some language lovers really enjoy finding new words, is because it expands them into new territories of meaning that they just never even thought of thinking of before. For example, like in Japanese, there's a word hikikomori. I think that's right. It roughly translates as forest bathing. And it's the idea that like it's that relaxation you get from just going off to the woods and like wandering around for a while. After you're done, you're like, you feel like clean in a certain sense. English doesn't have a word for that like particular stake in the meaning landscape, but Japanese does. And so there's a benefit and an opportunity to learning that word because it points out to you, it shows and demonstrates an aspect of reality that maybe you wouldn't have come across yourself just because you didn't have the words for it. So Proto-Indo-European, in a unique way, I think is awesome for that because the words are so simple general and broad that they carry a great amount of potential in them. So hopefully this doesn't sound like total nonsense. I've been thinking about these ideas for a long time. I've written drafts of a book on the subject that I just is a bear to work through, so it might be a while before that's available. But I think it's a particularly interesting way to think about meaning. Tell me what you think about this stuff. Is this total nonsense, or am I perhaps onto something here? The phrase I like to think of, just to wrap all this up, is if you want meaning, grab a dictionary. Peace.